Hi everybody, Flash Tribesman here with the Tribesman Talks. Today we are meeting or chatting with Griffin Johnsen. So, hi Griffin, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks so much. Thanks for giving the time, because obviously I'm in the UK and you're in the States. We've got a slight time difference. So first of all, thanks very much for giving me some time to have a chat. So how
Yeah,
are
no
you anyway?
problem. I've been doing good. Just been very busy with the release.
Okay.
But luckily now this week it's been a lot more relaxed. Obviously, we have a lot of bug reports coming in from people who are new at the game. So we're always discovering new things that we didn't know, especially every time we do a large update. But our team has been on top of that. So I've been able to take a step back a little bit and focus a little more on YouTube. But of course, I'm still directly involved with the game process as per usual. But it's a little less stressful. I think like the few weeks leading up to launch, anytime you do a big update or a release, it's like just tons of work every day, very stressful. So I'm just happy to have that out and start moving on.
So we talk about to tell us about the game. Obviously, we talk about Fire and Maneuver. So give us your lift pitch for Fire and Maneuver.
I guess you could. It's a very niche game, but it is a kind of like it's like a turn-based Total War, which is it's heavily inspired by old tabletop games, tabletop wargaming. It's got a little bit. I've heard other people compare it to chess in the way that moves are made, and the way you're planning out your moves. But it is set in the mid 19th century, so specifically from the years 1853 to 1871. Players can take command of different distinct large armies during the time period and either take them into battles against each other head to head, play against AI, or play one of our campaigns.
Brilliant. So again, and obviously Griffin F. Johnsen. Also, we might also know you as the Armchair Historian, with a tiny little YouTube channel of about 1.8 million subscribers at the moment, which is quite fantastic. Which is actually a fantastic channel. I'll put links in the description to obviously your main YouTube channel, also your Fire Maneuver YouTube channel as well. So if you look in the description, it'll all be in there. So again, you streamed in the night and you were talking about, because you've had two models. You've had Fire Maneuver as a free to download, and then you've switched over to a paid model with DLC. What was the reason behind originally doing it as a download for free with DLC you would buy, to switching it to being a traditional Steam financial model?
Yeah, so I always looked at my projects as kind of an extension of the philosophy I carried through YouTube. And on YouTube, you give out your videos for free, and you're hoping to make money through sponsorships or advertisements. And obviously, you can't stuff advertisements onto a PC game. You could, but I don't think people would be very happy with that. I don't think the infrastructure is really supported for that either. On mobile, it's a lot easier, but that's also why I think free to play lends itself better on mobile games too. For that reason, I think part of it was just being a little naive and just trying to extend that free model over to our games. And I think it was very successful in getting us. I think there were over 300,000 downloads. I think it was actually closer to 350,000, or at least people
Wow.
picking up the game. Maybe they never played it. I think only 1 or 200,000 played it, but 300,000 actually downloaded the game. And so we gave a lot of copies out for free. And I'm still so grateful for the reach it had. We had over 1,000 players on the launch day. And for a small niche little war game set during the Victorian period, it's not the Napoleonic Wars, it's not big medieval combat, it's a little more focused and made for people who really enjoy that time period in history. So to get over 1,000 people, I think that would only have been possible if it was free. I think a lot of the hype and attention it was getting earlier on also had to do with it being free. However, the game was very expensive to produce. I was hoping that by releasing it for free and including some DLC, we could make at least break even on the DLC. But I think players just didn't. Most people don't end up picking up DLC unless they're really into the game. I think two things happened. Number one, it's our first game. We definitely try to be very ambitious with it, And I think a lot of people maybe were initially disappointed with our first launch. And so, of course, they wouldn't want to get DLC for something that they think is not ready yet. It's not done. And so, if you show somebody a product when it first comes out, you're getting the most amount of eyeballs possible. But the game is in the least ready state because that was our first early access release. So we're basically getting the most amount of negative attention, but the most amount of attention. And so if you're trying to drive DLC sales, that's just not going to happen. And so your DLC sales might happen when it's fully released or after a year and you've had more time to work on the game. But of course, by that point, when we transition to the paid model, there's just not as many people there willing to give it a second try. I think a lot of people may have been burnt by our first release, which all of us were new. I have no experience in game design, and we had put that game out, and it wasn't very polished. I think there were some great core systems within it, but I think some core design decisions I had made early on kind of just put the game on the wrong path at first. And then as soon as we released the game, it was kind of like a slap in the face. Like, okay, yeah, you're supposed to be doing this. You released it as a free to play multiplayer focused game. And a lot of guys who like historical strategy want a good single player, a good tutorial, a good campaign, and good AI. And those are like all things we neglected completely in favor of a mass multiplayer free to play experience, which wasn't profitable and people weren't as happy with it. So I think that was just a huge learning experience. And then after a year of shifting the game's focus, we focused heavily on the single player content, improving the AI, adding different AI behaviors you can choose from, fixing a lot of the bugs. The campaign mode, which was pretty much broken on the release day, which should never, even if you go into early access, you should never have a broken feature accessible. At that point, you should just not allow players to click into that. Because that's also my fault. That's just part of this learning process. And so if I have the next opportunity to work on more games in the future, more content, it's like a million things I would do differently, and improving the quality and making sure I'm not letting stuff go out broken. But we basically overhauled the campaign modes from the ground up, went from having one free campaign to 8 total campaigns, 4 of which are free and the other 4 are the DLC. We liquidated 2 of the DLC that were on launch and just rolled them into the base game because we wanted players to have more content. So the focus was get more content in, get the AI fixed, get the campaigns, make them better, and just overall expand the single player content. And by doing that, then we felt like the game was more traditionally focused in like how most RTS games or turn-based games are presented on Steam and not taking that multiplayer free to play model. And so we thought that was an appropriate time this year to transition the game to paid. Of course, the thing is, though, I think like I was saying before, we already gave away 350,000 copies and then ended up selling like 1,000 copies because anybody who had had the opportunity to get the game before got it for free. So, and luckily no one was really upset. I didn't notice many folks upset with the transition. I do think it helped give us a little boost on the month of release just to help cover some of the costs. Fire Maneuver was never meant to be like a super profitable venture. It was just, this has always been a passion project. I built the game as a tabletop prototype before ever considering making it a video game. So certainly the paid release helped us just cover a little bit of the costs. But yeah, that was kind of the whole mentality just from the start of the game to where it is now on how our mindset changed based on how players enjoyed the game and how they were using the game, and ways they didn't like the game too. And then how we transitioned the whole focus and pretty much reinvented the game and re-released it this year in a more traditional paid sense.
So again, you say, you hinted there or said that you're not from a game development background. So what is your background? Being obviously you've got historical YouTube. So what is your background?
Well, I am more of I guess, a history enthusiast. I started my channel late in high school and then mainly focused on it in college. And in college, I got my first sponsorship offer, which ended up paying me more just on a single video. If I had done a few sponsorships, that would pay me more than if I had gotten any job in the field. So I was like, all right, I enjoy doing this. I'm able to reach more people than even if I was just a teacher teaching in a small classroom. I'm able to reach hundreds of thousands of people. So it's a fulfilling work, and I'm able to get paid more than otherwise. So I left college. Never got a degree in anything, and decided to just go full on with the YouTube channel, and that took off. I've always, just in terms of my background, not in education or training or anything, just in my own interests as a kid, was always interested in prototyping and building board games, and video games. I've just always been into that space, but more in the design area. So I was always attracted. I think as a kid, Roblox was just made. I think that came out in the early 2000s, and that's a type of game I would jump on as a kid because you can. I would just spend all my time building. It's just like whether it's with physical toys, building Legos or building things and designs, or on video games, any games that would allow you to exercise creativity. I think that's where at least I focused. And so while I don't have a background in game design, the development of Fire Maneuver over those courses of 2 years was basically like taking a 6-year game design course, pretty much. So I feel like I learned so many things. And at least I'm also able to recognize a billion mistakes I made, which feels good. It would feel crappy if we release the game, it does lukewarm, it does okay, and then you don't know why. But when you put out the game and it does okay, and then you're like, oh, I know a million things I'm going to change if I get that opportunity again, and the ways I've learned in so many ways, then that's much more exciting. But really, my background is just being an enthusiast in the gaming space and historical strategy games. Ever since my grandfather gifted me a laptop when I was a kid, and I just found all these historical strategy games to jump into, like Age of Empires 1 and 2, all the early RTS games. I got very into that. I liked the idea of designing my own things. And so during COVID, my YouTube channel was doing very well because everybody was indoors. So we had a lot of expendable income. And I wanted to try a project that was different. And I've always had the interest. I didn't rent out a foreign studio to make me a game. This all came from my own prototypes that I was building over Christmas. I got together with a friend who knew how to code. And I, of course, had the funding, the team, the art, and everything else that came along, and the marketing that came with the game. So we teamed up, brought a few more people on, just a very small development team. Most of the game was made by me and one coder. It was just us for about a year. And then the other year, we brought on 2 other coders. But yeah, that was about it. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know where else I'm going with that, but that's kind of like the story of how things kind of started. I had the expendable income. We wanted to create a new project, and then it was really just a passion project from the start, I would say.
My background is in SQL development coding, so to do it from scratch is quite an achievement, and it is always satisfying when you do release something. You go, "That's my baby. I made that from scratch." It is an
Yep.
achievement. It is an achievement. In terms of the DLC, obviously we've got the Boshin War and the American Civil War.
Right.
Were they chosen deliberately from a kind of, these are subjects I'm interested in? What was the reason? Because obviously the American Civil War, you could almost argue it was the first modern industrial war.
Right. So with the initial concept of the game, when I prototyped it, first I built it as a Napoleonic themed game, and so it was using, if it's Napoleonic themed, you're sticking in Europe. So
Yeah.
all of the factions I designed were all European. Then as I brought in people to play test it, they thought it'd be more unique if it was covering a time period that's less well known. And so I wanted to shift it to a personal favorite time period of mine, which is a mid to late Victorian period. And when I did that, all the factions I designed were still European. So I just kind of changed them and updated them to the period. And then when it was time to expand and look for ways to add more, I already had Europe fully filled out. And at that point, and of course, at that point as well, the game was free. So I needed to get a DLC out there. That was the only way. Some people were upset, like a whole day one DLC type of thing. But if the game is free and I give away 300,000 copies, I have there's no room for profit. Unlike a YouTube video, you can give that out for free. You got advertisers and sponsorships. You could have a sponsorship that pays up to $18,000 if your video is getting millions of views. If you can, now the days of that are pretty much over because COVID's done. Views are down maybe like 60%, which is normal because we had such a peak. And so you could get sponsorships that pay a lot. They're going to cover all of your costs. You can make very expensive videos. Or at least that was more the way during 2020 and 2021. Nowadays, we kind of have to be a little bit smarter about the way we're cutting down the video sizes a little bit. We have to be a little smarter about the way we're spending our money. But yeah, with the game, I wanted to have some way to bring in some. Initially, the American Civil War DLC brought in about 90% of the revenue that came in for the game. So that was the reason we made that a DLC. As far as the reason we picked it goes, the first would, like I was saying, was kind of by accident because I had already designed all the European factions, and so in looking to expand, I wanted to look overseas. And the American Civil War is like one of the most popular mid-Victorian conflicts, and obviously, as an American, I'm even the area I live in right now. I can drive 15 minutes and I'm on a battlefield. And I drive an hour south, I'm on another battlefield. They're all Civil War battlefields around here, and so Civil War has definitely been a big interest of mine. It was made a DLC just because we were giving the game away for free. So I would have loved to include it as part of the base game had we pursued a traditional payment model early on. But that's the kind of stuff you learn. So if I were to make games in the future, you know, and this is kind of a tangent, but for at least on computer games, I feel like half the time the developers are not very happy with a free to play game because you feel bad. You have to include monetization. If you want to be successful with it, there's almost a need to create predatory monetization models if you really want to be successful. And of course, the players aren't happy with that too. And they're on edge the whole time because, yeah, you picked up a game for free, but at any time you're going to be hit with that one thing in game that's going to stop you from progressing or stop you from being competitive on multiplayer. And or it's going to force you to grind or do even that term grinding is pretty much exclusive to the free to play scene. And so I think for me as a developer, I've just learned, unless I'm doing mobile games, which I'm just personally not interested in, I wouldn't pursue that free-to-play model. And if I'm not pursuing the free-to-play model, I would take something like the American Civil War DLC or other conflicts like that in future titles that we work on, and I would really try to include that as part of the base experience. And that's how I grew up playing games too. You buy the game, you have all the content, that's that. So I've always preferred innately that model. I think I wanted to try to adapt it to our YouTube model for game design, which just didn't really work at the time, and that was more being naive. But yeah, that's kind of the backstory as a financial decision and a historical interest decision on the Civil War as a DLC, and then the Boshin War. That one I was just kind of throwing out in our community. Hey, what would be a fun conflict to cover next, and something totally different. And so we wanted to look. We had covered North America, we had covered Europe. So the only other big part of the map that was missing was Asia or South America, but I think there was just a little less interest in South America because obviously samurai versus Paraguayan child soldiers. It's like, which one's cooler? The aesthetic, which one's cooler? People want to, yeah. So the samurai definitely won out in that debate. And I think also the Taiping Rebellion was also being considered. But I think Japan there were more people interested in that. And also there was a YouTuber, the Shogunate YouTuber. He creates Japanese history videos. And this guy volunteered to help us and pretty much fleshed out all of the content with the DLC in terms of planning the units and their abilities and that kind of thing. It was my job to design the maps and set up the scenario battles and that kind of thing. But Nick volunteered to pretty much just design the rosters for both of those factions. And that was something I was lost on because I'd bought a few books and it was just kind of hard to sift through. I wasn't used to Japanese history, and so I wasn't sure how I wanted to set up these factions. I had to add 40 units to the game. So each faction has approximately 20 units. So adding 40 unique units, and we don't copy and paste stuff. Every unit we make is built from scratch. They're built with their own uniform, with their own unit card, and with their own stats to make them distinct. Every faction has to play different in our game. There's no copying and pasting. So when we have to create 40 from scratch, that's a like month-long process just on building the roster. So shout out to Nick from the Shogunate for, if he wasn't there, I probably wouldn't have covered the DLC. I probably wouldn't have done it because I think I was too intimidated by it. I've always known more about American and European history, or even South America. I probably could have pulled off, especially with our community we had a small South American community who wanted to help out with that. But Nick definitely made that DLC happen because that guy is an expert in Japanese history and just helped us out tremendously.
So I would assume then that the level of historical accuracy is extremely high across all of the unit factions then.
I would say so. I bought the Osprey books for every single country that is involved in the game, as well as just general Victorian military history books. I have a whole shelf just dedicated to research I did for Fire Maneuver. Every unit I made sure had a source it came from, and the uniforms. What's awesome too is our artist, one of our lead artists, Nico. That guy, I should get an Instagram link and send that to people too, because he creates. I basically scouted him on Instagram because he was creating. I think I scouted him at the beginning of the game because that guy would create all of these cartoons of historical soldiers and battles, and he loved doing the research in making all the uniforms accurate. Even though they're cartoons, he put so much effort into it, and it was so awesome. I think he still posts on the Instagram, and it's one of the coolest historical cartoonists I've seen. And so we picked him out of that, and I don't think he had ever done work like this before. I don't think he ever worked on a game. But he drew all of our unit cards. And so we had YouTubers, including myself, doing the research and making sure we're getting the units right. And then we had a super passionate artist who had an equal skill in as being an artist as being a historical enthusiast. And this guy was able to go through all the uniforms and make sure they're right. So that was really fun for us. I think if you appreciate the period in the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, you would definitely appreciate the work that went into crafting the units, the identities of the factions. We made sure every faction had its own unique identity, so they all played very different from each other based on their historical stereotypes. So Britain at the time was known for a small, highly professionalized army. So we gave them the best shooting stats in the game across all of their units, which makes them by far the most expensive. But what's really cool about that is because they're the most expensive, they're going to be bringing the smallest armies. So you kind of represent history in that way, that Britain always had sent a small land force because their specialty was in the Navy, or utilizing local troops to fight their wars for them, like in India. And so you bring them into a battle, and you have situations like in real life, let's say at Inkerman, where you're outnumbered by a large Russian force, but your guys are able to pick out targets from 1,000 yards away with their newer Enfield rifles. So you get to simulate history in that way by gamifying certain stereotypes known in that period, and that's something that's really fun. And then you've got our artist who's able to look up those uniforms, look up those units, and make sure each of them is done with a lot of care and accuracy. And so I think there's over 200 units in the game, if I'm not mistaken. And every single one of those, we spent so much time on crafting. Nothing was just kind of thrown in, or there's, again, to reiterate before, there's no copy and pasting. So I played previous strategy games, not saying our game is superior to them, but one complaint I had with some of the RTS historical games is you would play a lot of different factions, and the standard line infantry or the basic units would just be the same across every single faction, just with a new skin over them. And we wanted to make sure in our game, every time you played a new faction, it just felt like a whole different way you're playing the game. And that is something. So speaking of just learning mistakes, you also learn things you did well. So that was something I really enjoyed that we did, and I'd love to carry that into future games. Always making different. I very much personally enjoy asymmetric balancing and design. So when you get to make everything, it's much more difficult to do it that way. But I got so much experience over these few years with Fire Maneuver and balancing all these units with the community who are very involved with shaping and balancing the game. And I think we did a very good job for what we had and the resources we had and a smaller community. And we still got the game to be very balanced. So that's something I enjoy. And I love taking history and then finding ways that each military distinguishes itself and then trying to represent that in a gamified context.
That's fantastic. If you come across a link for both your artist and the Shogunate, send them over to me. I'll put them in the description so people can go and check them out.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be great.
So, what's the future for Fire Maneuver then? Where do you see it going? Are you going to continue development on it, or are you going to move on to something new?
I think. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
So I was actually, because I was saying from your stream, I'll put all the descriptions as well from the other day. You were talking about maybe not doing any more work on Fire Maneuver other than maintenance.
Yeah, I would say what I will do is likely we're going to do one last full-time month on the game, which will be in May. And that's just focused on quality of life and fixing bugs. So every single bug that has ever been reported in our Discord server, we have 2 dedicated guys on our staff who read through every single report, log every single report, assign it to a developer, and assign it on a schedule to be fixed. So every single thing any member, even if they're brand new to the community, has ever reported is on our list. Does that mean we're going to get to all of them if there's hundreds of little things everywhere? Probably not. But that does mean throughout May, if we're dedicating the whole month to Fire Maneuver and we're just working on bugs, then we can make a huge dent in any of the problems people have been having, especially optimization. That was something that I think we neglected. Past that, I'm definitely willing to do maintenance. If anybody discovers a single thing that's game breaking, I would hate to leave a game. The thing is regardless of profitability, even if there's no, let's say no more, not a single dollar ever came into Fire Maneuver, I would never want to leave one of my projects out and not playable if it was game breaking or something severe to the product. We're never going to sell a product that is completely broken. I would hate that. So that's something we'll definitely maintain throughout the year. If anybody discovers anything that's broken, we're going to keep our developers there to be able to work on it. As far as new content goes, I just don't know if it's a small game. I think the community we have is very passionate. I talk with the guys in the community all the time in our Discord. They're all very friendly and very into the game. I just don't know if there are enough of them that would carry. I did the math even yesterday, actually, and I could probably get creating a new faction down to $1,200, which is really cheap when you consider all the artwork and voice acting and music and all the stuff that goes into it, because I was finding ways to cut costs in utilizing even members of the community who could volunteer to help us build these things. We have a few members in the community who do fan art, and we gave one or two of them access to our unit card templates, and they can recreate our unit cards in extreme detail, even with approval of Nico, our artist, who actually likes them as well. But even with all of that, the DLC comes out to $1,200. I don't know if we'd even be able to break even on a DLC to get a new faction out there. So at that rate, if we don't know, or if we think it's likely that we can end up losing money on adding another faction, I think if we had like 1,000 players in the game or 500 players in the game, you could probably put out a DLC and make a couple $1,000s. Or even up to like $10,000. I think for us, we're looking at a couple $100s on a DLC, which just as a studio, when you're supporting full-time developers and you're paying close to $10,000 a month in development costs, when you're looking at putting down $10,000 in development, and then you're looking at bringing in a couple $100, at that point, it's just not going to make sense. So not to make the whole conversation pragmatic and financial, but I do want to give some insight that it's not just the idea of that we're going to abandon it out of laziness, or we take the money and go, or anything like that at all. Fire Maneuver has always been a passion project. So the development has been regardless of the profitability. But that being said, spending additional thousands or hundreds of hours on adding to something that just doesn't have the audience, I just don't think. And also the other thing about that is we want to leave the game in a state where it can still be enjoyed, let's say years from now. And let's say not one person's playing the game years from now. I still want the game to be left in a good enough state that somebody new could jump in and still have fun because of the single player experience. So I don't think that should deter anybody from the game if we're no longer adding a bunch of new content to it. The issue is if we added another faction, that faction's primarily going to be used on multiplayer. But if the game is small and you're not going to find a lot of multiplayer games because it's the future of the game is probably in its single player, then number one, we're not going to profit off the DLC, and number two, the guys who pick up the DLC might be disappointed because it probably couldn't come with a big campaign and all this single player content. So I wouldn't want to disappoint players in the future, and I also wouldn't want to lose money for our development team that we could be saving for either future projects or to reinvest in our YouTube channel. So again, just to give an explanation toward our players and then toward the finance in the background. Those would be the two reasons we probably wouldn't be adding too much more. That said, if something changes, the one thing I will say, just to end on a more positive note there, I'm still going to be covering the game. It is still my passion project. I will probably stream it every few weeks on my main channel, even if nobody's watching or hundreds of people are watching or whatever it is. I'll still be doing that because it's still the game that we built and that we're very proud of releasing. And we'll probably still be hosting events on our Discord server too. So anybody who's part of our community or wants to be part of it will probably still do stuff like that or even tournaments. But as far as like creating big, expensive DLC, I just don't think the game has got. I think the community that we have is awesome. I'm so appreciative of the people we have. But there's no way, even if all of them bought it, it just wouldn't make it possible, unfortunately. I don't think if the game had its players that it did on its release day and early access, I think we definitely could. But I think a lot of those guys got burnt by a game that was released too early, and they're not willing to come back and give it another chance, which I think is totally fair. If I bought into a game, well, it was free. Okay, so I'll give myself some credit. It was free. If I got a game and it wasn't working the way it should have, I would be disappointed as well. So I'm not going to come from this as entirely from the perspective as a developer thinking I'm entitled for people to play the game. If it's not ready and you didn't have a good experience, then you should not have to pay for that. And so I am happy that we released it for free, so no one wasted money if the game on its release day last year just wasn't working properly for them. So at least there's that. And but yeah, I'm appreciative of the community that we've got. I just don't think there's enough people even if all of them bought it, I don't think that's even enough to cover if the DLC is, let's say, $5. You would need a lot of people to all pitch in to make that work. So I just don't think that would be in the plans for us. Now, you did mention the live stream I did with Project Ruby. That's kind of an unannounced project. It's not confirmed either. So it could very easily, a year from now, we could be working on something else, or a year from now, we could be working on nothing. You know, it depends on the funding we get. It depends on how far we get with certain projects. I don't want to ever make something sound like it's officially announced. In fact, there are 2 live streams before the one that you watched. And those in those live streams, we were convinced of going with a totally separate project. And that decision was changed in like a month. So during this early spitball phase, I like to involve my community to kind of gauge the reception. And things change all the time. So with that being said, I probably don't want to talk too much about Project Ruby because we've gone through Project Azure, Project Coral, Project Ruby, and Project Crimson. And there were like 6 more projects on top of that were also scrapped. So it's a lot of what is cool though is with Fire Maneuver, I didn't even build a design document. I didn't even have a single design document. We kind of winged the whole thing. With these future hypothetical projects, just because we learned from our experience and understanding how methodical planning will just help the longevity of the game and help keep things organized, we have like 50-page documents on these project ideas alone that might not even be created. And so that's just us being more serious, being more mature and thorough with our ideas and not just rushing things through. So there is that. But otherwise, yeah, I won't talk too much about it because I would hate to waste your guys' time listening with getting you excited for a project that might not even happen. So I will announce anything I'm doing much closer to the release of the actual project, which might be if we just, I don't even know if we'll be able to continue working on games. It's entirely self-funded. So that's just me funding stuff out of pocket. Maybe we'll try to crowdfund something. We'll see. But if we don't get the funding, then we will not be making games. But if I can get something crowdfunded in the future, then I will announce to you guys later what our plans are. But that would be probably my official answer on that.
I do appreciate the honesty. It's a fascinating insight into game development and what happens and the thought process. I do appreciate it. I appreciate honesty. I could totally understand the wanting not to say anything too early. So it's fantastic. In terms of Fire Maneuver, is there a possibility for the modding community to be involved? Is that something that's been considered, or is that something that's too complicated and just not something you'd want to get a track you want to go down?
Yeah, so I've always loved modding. I don't use mods nowadays too often, but I've always loved modding and seeing what they can do, especially with open-ended like map simulator games or like paradox games. Those are awesome to see mods for those. And even myself, I'll go into modding and edit saves and share those saves, even at the most basic level, doing some console changes and editing and tinkering with games all the time. That said, I think that was part of our initial plan. We built a map editor and a unit editor, and we were so excited to share that with people. But from a technical, I think we just bit off so much, like more than we could chew, that so just to give full transparency, if we were to try to include a map editor or a unit editor, it would probably be an additional 4 to 6 months. Well, let's say 4 months of working on that alone. And if we calculate the costs that go into that, again, I hate to make the conversation so financial. I promise I'm not obsessed with like seeing everything through a financial lens. I do this, like to reiterate before, this is like a passion project I'm doing just because I love game design. I love this time period. But if we just look at it from a pragmatic, I am running a business as well, simultaneously being creative and being into the game design. That is one of my roles, and leading the game team. But also leading a business and making sure that my guys can be fed and they can be paid and that we're not going to let a bunch of people go. So if we were to put in a map designer, I would imagine that'd be months and months of work. And we'd have to repurpose the existing map editor, which is it really can only be used within Unity, so in engine. So we'd have to develop it as its own software and then create the ability for players to export those creations into a workshop, be able to download those from a workshop, import them back into the game fully exported, and then load in and sync that with other players. And that's a big challenge. Even using our own map editor in our backend, it's a little bit rough around the edges. So trying to give that to other players, I just don't even know. It's also just not very optimized. It'd be a month of just optimizing it, right? So, or maybe a week. It wouldn't be too bad. But it's just all these little weeks and months that add up to seeing that something's going to cost a lot. And if we look at what it's going to bring in, let's say I give this map editor to the 80 people playing the game. Even if all of them enjoy it, it's not like I can sell it. It's not like it's not going to draw too many more people into the game who wouldn't have entered the game otherwise. So unfortunately, I just don't think it's pragmatic for us to be able to do that. But that being said, I understand the benefit of Steam Workshop and modding so much that in future projects, I definitely would want to lay the groundwork in every system we're making to have the potential for moddability, for overhaul mods, for anything people want to do. There's no promises I can make, just like I can't promise that we're even making another game because I don't know if we're going to be able to get the funding. But should we have that opportunity, should we be lucky enough, I value modding and that kind of community engagement and involvement so much that I would love that to be a big part of the game design process. So for Fire Maneuver, we had it initially in mind, but it was just, again, most of the development was just me and one friend. So we tried to do a lot at once. And I think we tried to do too much. And so just trying to add more onto that at this point, I think it's too late. I think the game's done. I think it's, we definitely need to clean a few more things up, listening to the bug reports, optimizing a little bit. But as far as adding brand new features or brand new systems or brand new tools go, I just don't think we have the funding or the time to do it. And that being said, if we had the player base, if we had priced the game from the start, maybe, and we had the money for the studio to do it, then I love adding little things. Even I didn't have to do this, but even in this Friday's update, I ordered like 5 more songs to play just to make each nation that doesn't have enough music. Just because we create unique marching music for every single nation in the game. I think there's a few nations that only have 1 song. So I even ordered, and again, it's expensive, but it brings nothing back just because I want those factions to feel more unique. And so I will do things now and then that's not entirely viewed through a pragmatic lens. I will just add to the game if I think something's cool. Like even in the lead up to the game, I personally designed and created all of the maps in the game, and there are over 100. I don't think we needed to have 100. I think half of those probably never even got played, but they're in the game if anybody ever wants to touch them. But I wanted to just because it was a goal of mine. I'm like, how cool would it be to hit 100 maps? I want to cover every major historical battlefield of the entire mid-Victorian period, and I want to do them accurately. And that was just a big goal of mine. And that was just something, regardless if anybody even plays those maps, I'm just so proud of being able to even hit the goal. So a lot of it was just driven by passion, but you've always got to have the business mindset in the background thinking, all right, I'm going to put in an extra few weeks of work. It's probably not the smartest thing to do. But you know what, let's not let that go past 2 weeks. Let's not take a month off of work to do something just for the passion of it. Maybe we can take a week to do something for passion, but not a whole month. So it's just a balancing act between being pragmatic and idealistic and just wanting to add more and be creative.
Again, it's like I say, it's a fascinating insight into the trials and tribulations of game design and game development and trying to balance off your passion against the business realities. It's a fascinating insight. In terms of obviously you're an RTS fan, so what do you take? How do you put it? What games do you play? What games do you look at and go, I love playing that game. That's one I want to strive for. What type of games have you played yourself that have formed your kind of, that's what the type of game I want to play, if that question makes sense. Not a very well worded question.
No, yeah, I understand. So games, just to clarify, games that inspired me in my design or games that okay, gotcha.
Yeah, just games that have inspired you both in kind of the type of game you want to design and the type of game you want to try and replicate.
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I did a lot of RTS games. So Age of Empires 1, Age of Empires 2, Age of Empires 3. I did, I'm not going to be able to remember everything off the top of my head, but a lot of those kind of historical RTS games. The Stronghold series was really, really fun. That was like so innovative early on. Having a castle builder, especially, I think they started in 2D with their first games, and with the amount of depth and like every person going to their jobs and picking up resources and moving them around, that was just awesome to see that being simulated. I think they even had a mode, I think you just built a castle, there was no combat, just to watch your people go to work and build basically kind of like just a city sim in a way. So games like that were really cool to see. I love seeing how all of those things kind of come together. I'm sure there's a bunch of games I'm not going to be able to remember the names of, but I played as any game that was historical strategy, I tried to get my hands on. I was just obsessed with that as a kid. As far as what I play now, or what I played in the years even leading up to Fire and Maneuver, I did a little bit of tabletop wargaming. So not on the digital side. I did some tabletop wargaming in high school with a group of friends that I formed, and we would meet every summer to play that, and we would kind of build and expand our own rules. And that's where I got a lot of inspiration for Fire Maneuver specifically. I'd say the biggest inspirations, funnily enough, would be like chess, tabletop wargaming, and Total War. Probably those three for Fire Maneuver specifically. But as far as in a more generalized way, definitely the Total War games. I played all of those. I think I've played every single Total War game with the exception of the first Shogun and the first Medieval games. And also the exception of their newer stuff. I just don't like fantasy. So the moment they started introducing fantasy and historical games, I was out. But even their games that focused on history, like Thrones of Britannia, they also just okay, so on one end, if you throw in a bunch of fantasy elements, I'm just not interested in it. And on the other hand, if you just stick with the history and you don't find a way to uniquely innovate or make factions distinct or make playstyles distinct, and you end up doing Thrones of Britannia, where it's one location and copy and paste what it feels like to be copy and paste factions, I'm also not interested in that. So I like a good balance between finding the history, exaggerating the history to make things unique and replayable. I think Rome 1 Total War did such a good job of that. I love the way that each Roman house was its own country, because you get a little bit of the history by showing there were different houses competing for power, even though that's not how Rome was organized. It did show a little bit of decentralized rule within Rome to show again that there were powers going against each other. And then the other thing it simultaneously did was set up the game for a civil war and set up a big end game and made things distinct in that kind of way. And it made it replayable because each Roman house, you had one avenue for expansion that you could go into. So I really enjoyed when games would find history, stick to it, but then find a few things that they can exaggerate in a gamified form to recreate a similar historical outcome. So that's not necessarily the way the Roman houses conducted themselves and the Roman Empire was formed, but the fact that it leads to a three-way civil war in such an organic way is such a cool system that they had in that game. I really enjoyed things like that. So I don't mind if games don't follow history 100%, as long as they take the history and do something fun with it. I think a mistake that I made with Fire Maneuver is I went in with it with like 60% history in mind to 40% fun and gamification. And nowadays I'm more 70% fun and gamification to 30% history, which sounds bad, but that doesn't mean, I would say games where you're looking at a trailer and seeing, I don't know, in World War I, everybody's got machine guns. That's obviously wrong. Or games that you've got, I think Battlefield had released, Battlefield 5 had a trailer where this woman had like bionicle arms and like a baseball bat in World War II. And I don't have a political opinion on that. I have a historical opinion on that. That is like 5%. The way I view that, that's 5% historical to 95% gameplay. So when I say 30%, that's actually big for me. You don't want the point I'm trying to make is you don't want the historical accuracy to be so large in your percentage of the focus of the game, let's say 60%, which is how I initially thought, that it actually detracts from the fun of the game and people don't enjoy it. It's not, if you could brag to 3 people, my game is super historically accurate, but there's only 3 people there to listen to you because it's not fun, then I think you failed as a designer. So it's important to have historical accuracy in mind, but if no one's willing to play it because it's not fun, the medium you're creating in it's called a video game. It's a game. So if the game doesn't come first and at that point, why aren't you writing a book or just a software or something that's not in the game space? So I think that's something as well that I learned. And those, to go back to the original question, that's just something I appreciate when I would play historical games that have a good balance between the historical accuracy and gamifying things in a fun way and adding a lot of variety. So Empire Total War is a game that I still love because they have so many cultures in such a wide map that it all feels so different and distinct. And so you can play against Native Americans, you can play against Indians in the East, you can play as against the Ottomans or the steppes in Eastern Europe. There's so much variety there. So I enjoy the variety in those games. Even if some of those things are exaggerated within the historical space, it just makes it more unique and interesting to me. And then the last thing I'll end on is I play a lot of Paradox games too. That's in high school, I was obsessed. To this day, I think they're a time sink, honestly. I can't play them as much anymore, even though I just played like Hearts of Iron yesterday. There's such a time sink. That's not a criticism of the game. That's like a compliment. Like if I play, I'm the type of person where if I start a project, it has to be finished under all conditions. If I come out bruised and bloody, it's just, I'll work on game design. I'll work on Fire Maneuver. by waking up in the morning at 9 a.m. and look outside and it's 3 a.m. and I forgot to eat that day. It's like it can be detrimental to the obsession I have over work projects like that, or even in games. If the game convinces me I have a task to do and it feels like I'm doing work and building something, then I'm playing that for 12 hours straight until the task is completed. The thing with Paradox games is you could play them for several days without finishing. So if you give that to me, I will play for several days until it is 100% finished. I'm not a completionist, but I have to get to the end. I have to feel like I completed something. And that can be dangerous for me with certain games. Yeah.
They are black holes, and that can suck you halfway. Paradox games are. They are very black holes. And so it's been fascinating talking to you. I've really enjoyed it. I think I've been recording Fire Maneuver coverage to overlay the video, and the AI is very, very good. It's handed me my rear end on several occasions. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's good fun. It's well worth checking out. And yeah, I appreciate the call. So yeah, I think it's a nice place to end.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you offering as well to interview. I think you had some great questions too. I definitely rambled a lot, but I think I tried to give the most extensive answers as I could to your questions. But I appreciate you taking the time as well.
I appreciate it. I believe you're talking with Seth, Strategy and Former, next week as well.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So
Yep. All right, we'll do.
Cool. But yeah, anyway, thanks very much. I'll put links in the descriptions to all the various channels we've discussed, and I'll see you next one. Thanks so much. See you. Bye.
All right, thank you.